Thousands of meters below the Bermuda Triangle, inside a failing submersible, one man is losing his grip on reality. The pilot sees only darkness and dying instruments, but astrophysicist Kaelen Vance sees something else. Shimmering outside the viewport is his sister, the one who vanished in these waters 7 years ago. She's smiling, beckoning him forward. Is it a hallucination brought on by pressure and grief? Or is he about to solve a mystery by surrendering to the impossible? 7 years ago, Dr. Kaelen Vance was a star, not just in his field of astrophysics, but a star in the public consciousness. He stood on the stage of a packed university auditorium, a god in a tailored suit, silhouetted against a projection of the cosmic web. He was young, brilliant, and devastatingly certain. Professor Albright's theory, Kaelen said, his voice resonating with the easy confidence of a man who knows he's the smartest in the room, is not merely flawed, it is a work of fiction. A charming one, I'll grant you. It has heroes and villains, a beginning, a middle, and an end. The only thing it lacks is evidence. He clicked a remote, and the star chart behind him was overlaid with his own data. Cool, hard numbers and graphs that sliced through his rival's hypothesis like a scalpel. He spoke of signal-to-noise ratios, of redshift artifacts, of the simple, brutal arithmetic of the universe. He was dismantling another man's life as work, and he was enjoying it. In the front row, his younger sister Lyra watched him. She was 20-something, her face a canvas of conflicting emotions. There was pride, yes, a deep and abiding pride in her brother's fierce intellect. But there was also a flicker of concern in her eyes, a worry about the sharp, unyielding edges of his certainty. On the leather cord around her neck, a small, intricate silver charm, a tightly wound spiral, seemed to absorb the ambient light of the auditorium. When Kaelen finished, the applause was thunderous. He smiled, a conqueror-esque smile, and took a sip of water. Dr. Vance, a new voice cut through the applause. An older man was rising from his seat in the second row. Professor Emeritus Davies, a legend. The man who had written the textbooks Kaelen had studied. An elegant presentation, Davies said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of authority. But I have a question about your methodology, specifically the data presented in Chart 3B. Kaelen kept smiling, but it was a little tighter now. Of course, Professor. Davies nodded to an assistant, who brought up a new slide on a side screen. It was Kaelen's chart, but next to it was another raw dataset. I took the liberty of requesting the raw telemetry from the orbital array you cited, Davies said calmly. And I found something curious. Your processed data, the data you just presented, appears to have selectively emitted outlier signals. Specifically, signals that would, if included, lend significant credence to the very theory you just called fiction. The auditorium went silent. Kaelen stared at the two charts. He knew what Davies was saying was true. He had shaved the data, just a little. He had told himself it was noise, statistical ghosts. But he knew, deep down, he had done it because the outliers complicated his beautiful, clean conclusion. He had done it because he needed to be right. Can you account for this discrepancy, Dr. Vance? Davies asked, his voice devoid of malice, which somehow made it worse. It was a simple question of process, a question of truth. Kaelen opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The certainty that had been his armor, his weapon, his entire identity, evaporated under the harsh stage lights. In that moment, he was no longer a star. He was just a man, stripped bare, his career imploding in the suffocating silence of 1,000 staring eyes. The last thing he saw before he turned and walked off the stage was Lyra's face, the pride gone, replaced by a deep, heartbreaking sorrow. That was 7 years ago. The man now known as Kaelen Vance bears little resemblance to the star who fell from the academic heavens. His world is no longer a grand auditorium, but the claustrophobic cabin of the Anomaly, a rusting 40-foot research trawler he bought with the last of his savings. He is adrift, both literally and figuratively, in the heart of the Sargasso Sea, in the Bermuda Triangle. He is 40 now, his face hidden behind a thick, unkempt beard, his eyes holding the haunted, far-off look of a man perpetually searching for something he knows he will never find. The cabin is his monastery and his prison, a shrine to the god that failed him, data. Humming server racks are bolted to the walls where bunks used to be. Every surface is plastered with printout sonar maps of the seafloor, complex charts of magnetic flux, weather patterns stretching back 50 years. His movements are meticulous, obsessive. He sips lukewarm coffee from a stained mug, his eyes darting between a half-dozen monitors. He is cross-referencing, cataloging, mapping. He is trying to impose the rigid, logical grid of science onto a place the world has given over to myth. For 5 years he has been out here. 5 years of punishing, self-imposed exile. He is hunting for a rational explanation. Rogue waves, methane gas eruptions, infrasound. He catalogues every ship, every plane that has vanished, convinced that if he can just gather enough data, a pattern will emerge. A clean, scientific, verifiable pattern that will explain it all. That will explain her. Because this isn't about science, not really. It's a penance. He is trying to solve the mystery that took his sister, Lyra, using the only language he has ever trusted. He is trying to prove that the world is governed by measurable forces, that there are no ghosts, no curses, no thin places where the world breaks. He needs to believe that what happened to Lyra was a definable, natural disaster, an accident. Anything else is unthinkable. The memory hits him like a rogue wave, sharp and violent, as it so often does in the lonely hours of the day. It's from 8 years ago, just before her final voyage. The sun is bright on the docks of Fort Lauderdale. The air smells of salt and diesel. Lyra is standing on the deck of her boat, the Sequest, a vessel far more seaworthy than Kaelen's current rust bucket. She is vibrant, alive, her skin tanned from the sun. He is arguing with her, lecturing her. "It is a statistical cluster, Lyra," he says, his voice dripping with the condescending patience he reserved for those who didn't see the world through the clear lens of science. A combination of extreme weather, the Gulf Stream, and human error. It's not a monster's den. It doesn't have a soul. She just smiles, that same sad, knowing smile she would give him a year later in the auditorium. She reaches up and touches the silver spiral charm at her throat. "You think everything can be caught in your net of numbers," she says, her voice gentle. "But the ocean is deep, Kay. There are places where the world is thin, places that don't follow the rules." He scoffs, actually scoffs at her. "That's poetry, Lyra, not science. Stick to your charts. Be safe." She holds up the charm. "A sailor gave this to me in the Azores. He said it was a map for navigating the currents you can to sea." "Superstitious nonsense," he mutters. "Maybe," she says, her eyes searching his. "But not everything that's real can be measured." She leans over and kisses his cheek. "See you on the other side, Kay." It was the last time he saw her. The last words she ever spoke to him. Not everything that's real can be measured. The phrase haunts his every waking moment, a ghost in his machine of logic. A sudden high-pitched alarm shatters the memory, shrieking through the cabin with an urgency that electrifies the air. Kaelen jolts from his chair, coffee sloshing over his hand. It's the deep-range energy detector, an experimental piece of equipment he built himself, designed to sniff out exotic magnetic signatures. For 5 years, it has done nothing but record the chaotic background hiss of the Earth's magnetosphere. But this is different. He stares at the monitor, his heart hammering against his ribs. It is not the frantic random scribble of natural magnetic flux. It has a signal, a structured, rhythmic, repeating pulse. A heartbeat. His hands fly across the keyboard, the years of obsessive practice taking over. He isolates the signal, cleans up the interference, triangulates the source. He works with a speed and clarity he hasn't felt in years. The old, brilliant Kaelen Vance clawing his way out from under the weight of grief and failure. Then the coordinates flash on the screen. Latitude and longitude. A precise point in this vast, empty ocean. Kaelen's blood runs cold. He stumbles back from the console, a choked gasp escaping his lips. He knows those coordinates. He has them tattooed on his mind. He has stared at them on his charts every day for the last 7 years. It is the exact location where Lyra's vessel, the Sequest, sent its final garbled distress call before it vanished from the face of the earth. The heartbeat was coming from her grave. For a long time, Kaelen just stared at the screen. The rhythmic pulse of the signal was a stark contrast to the frantic, chaotic beating of his own heart. 7 years of grief, of guilt, of grinding, monotonous work, it had all collapsed into this single, impossible moment. A signal from the grave, a heartbeat from the abyss. He knew what he had to do. The thought tasted like ash in his mouth. He had to go back to them. He had to ask for help from the world that had cast him out. His fingers trembled as he typed the encrypted address for the video call. He hadn't used it in half a decade. After a moment, the screen flickered to life, and the face of Dr. Ava Rostova resolved into view. She hadn't aged a day. Her silver hair was cut in the same severe, practical style. Her eyes, magnified slightly by her glasses, were as sharp and discerning as ever. Behind her, the shelves of a pristine university office were lined with books and awards, a diorama of the life Kaelen had thrown away. "Kaelen," she said. Her voice was flat, containing neither warmth nor surprise. It was the voice of a person observing a data point. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" He looked a mess, and he knew it. Hair wild, beard untamed, eyes wide with a manic energy he couldn't suppress. "Eva, IV found something." He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He shared his screen, pushing the data from his experimental detector into the feed. He showed her the pulse. Clean, structured, unnatural. He explained his location, the years of mapping, the dead zone of anomalous readings. "It's a signal, Eva," he said, his voice cracking with an intensity he couldn't control. "Not random flux, not geological noise. It's a repeating, information-rich signal from a depth of over 4,000 meters." He took a breath, the hardest part yet to come. "I need funding, a proper survey team, a deep-sea submersible." Eva watched the data scroll across her screen, her expression unreadable. She was silent for a long moment. Her eyes narrowed in concentration. She was a gatekeeper of the establishment, a high priestess of orthodox science. Her skepticism was a physical force. "The pattern is intriguing," she conceded, her voice cold and measured. "It resembles the energy cascade of a magnetar, but the periodicity is too stable. And of course, there isn't a neutron star at the bottom of the Atlantic." She looked up from the data, her eyes pinning him to the back wall of his cabin. "However, you'll forgive my hesitation, Kaelen, given your history with data irregularities." The words hit him like a physical blow. His past, always there, always ready to be used as a weapon against him. "This is different, Ava. This is real." "Is it?" she challenged. "Or is it another ghost in the machine? Another beautiful theory you've chased at the expense of the facts? You're in the Bermuda Triangle, for God's sake. You are chasing sea monsters and phantom ships. I am chasing a verifiable, repeating energy signature," he shot back, his voice rising. "This has nothing to do with superstition. This is a legitimate scientific anomaly that demands investigation." Eva considered him, her fingers steepled before her. He could see the conflict in her mind. The scientist in her was hooked by the puzzle. The administrator, the gatekeeper, was wary of the disgraced academic with a history of obsession. The scientist won, but only by a narrow margin. "I can authorize a submersible," she said finally. "Not based on this. It's too thin. Too much of a risk, both financially and professionally." Kaelen's heart sank. "But," she continued, holding up a hand, "I will authorize a preliminary drone survey, one of our new AUVs, the Argo. It's top of the line. It will give us a full sensor reading and high-definition video. I'll divert the expedition ship Logos to your position, but it will be on a tight leash, and my pilot will be in charge of the deployment. You are there as a consultant only. Am I clear?" He nodded, a wave of frustrated relief washing over him. It wasn't what he wanted, but it was a start. It was a way forward. "Find something real, Kaelen," she said, her voice softening almost imperceptibly. "Find something undeniable, for your own sake. No more ghosts." The screen went dark, leaving Kaelen alone in the humming silence of his cabin, a bitter taste in his mouth, but a sliver of hope in his chest. Weeks later, the world had changed. Kaelen stood on the deck of the Logos, a research vessel that made his trawler, the Anomaly, look like a childish toy. The Logos was a gleaming white cathedral of science, staffed by a small professional crew who moved with quiet efficiency. They were on station over the coordinates, the deep blue water of the Atlantic churning gently beneath them. Kaelen was briefing the team in the ship's main control room. He presented the mission in the driest, most scientific terms possible. They were there to map a unique, localized energy field. He showed them the data, the charts, the projections. He was the picture of a detached, professional consultant. But inside, a storm was raging. With every mention of geophysical anomaly, his mind screamed, "It's Lyra." When he pointed to the target coordinates on the map, he didn't see a point in the ocean. He saw the place where his sister had drawn her last breath. He had to carefully wall off his personal stake, his faith-based hope, from the objective mission. The deception felt heavy, a lead weight in his gut. The pilot Eva had chosen, a man named Harris, was the physical embodiment of skepticism. He was sharp, by the book, and had a look on his face that suggested he thought this whole expedition was a colossal waste of time and fuel. "So we re-dropping a $12 million drone into the ocean because your personal sensor picked up a funny radio signal?" Harris asked, his arms crossed. "It is not a radio signal," Kaelen replied, keeping his voice even. "It is a multi-spectrum energy pulse with a coherent, repeating structure. It is unlike anything on record." Harris just grunted, unconvinced. "Right, well, let's go dunk your Anomaly." The tension in the control room was thick enough to taste. The crew prepped the Argo, a sleek yellow torpedo-shaped drone. It was a marvel of technology, bristling with sensors, cameras, and manipulators. It was the pinnacle of rational, scientific exploration. As it was lowered into the water by a crane, Kaelen felt a surge of anticipation. This was it. The moment of truth. Proof. The drone began its descent. On the main screen in the control room, a camera feed showed the blue water darkening to black, motes of marine snow drifting past the lens. Telemetry data streamed across a dozen other monitors: depth, pressure, temperature, salinity. Everything was nominal. They passed 2,000 meters, then 3,000. The energy readings from the drone's sensors began to climb, matching Kaelen's data perfectly. The pulse was there, faint but clear. Approaching 4,000 meters, the drone operator called out. "Energy readings are spiking. At 4,215 meters it happened." The camera feed began to distort, the image tearing and flickering. A high-pitched squeal erupted from the audio speakers. "What the hell is that?" Harris snapped. "The field is intensifying," Kaelen said, his eyes glued to the energy telemetry. It wasn't just a steady pulse anymore. It was cascading, folding in on itself, amplifying at an exponential rate. Then, all at once, every sensor on the drone redlined. The numbers went off the charts. The camera feed dissolved into a blinding flash of white light, and the squeal became a deafening roar of static, and then silence. Every monitor connected to the drone went black. The telemetry stream flatlined. The operator frantically tried to re-establish a connection. "Signal lost. I've got nothing. The Argo is dead." The control room was silent, the only sound the gentle hum of the ship's engines. Harris let out a short, cynical laugh. "Well, there you go. You found it. A new type of deep-sea geothermal vent. Must have fried the drone systems with a massive electromagnetic pulse. Congratulations, Doctor. You found a hot rock." But Kaelen wasn't listening. He was staring at the last few seconds of telemetry data, frozen on a side monitor. The energy spike hadn't been random. It hadn't been a simple eruption. The pulse had changed its frequency, its amplitude, its very structure to perfectly match the drone's own electronic signature. It had focused, and it had struck. His blood ran cold with a horrifying realization. The failure wasn't an accident of geology. It wasn't a passive phenomenon. It was defensive. Kaelen didn't sleep. For 36 hours, he turned his cabin into a command center in a war against physics. The video call icon on his monitor blinked with insistent, unanswered calls from Eva Rostova. He ignored them. The world outside his sealed door, the world of protocols and recriminations and plausible explanations, had ceased to exist. His entire universe was the ghost data from the destroyed drone, the final scream of its sensors frozen on his screen. Harris had called it a geothermal vent, an EM pulse from a hot rock. The official report would say the same. It was a neat, tidy, scientific explanation for a $12 million failure, and it was wrong. Kaelen knew it was wrong, because the pulse hadn't just been powerful, it had been elegant. It had mirrored the drone's own resonant frequency, turning its systems against itself. It wasn't an explosion, it was a countermeasure. It wasn't interference, it was a language. Surrounded by a graveyard of empty coffee cups and overflowing ashtrays, Kaelen had a breakthrough that felt like heresy. He had been trying to shout over the noise. What if, instead, he tried to listen to it? He stopped treating the energy field as a physical obstacle and began treating it as a cipher. A complex, layered code designed to repel intrusion. Working with a feverish intensity, he didn't write a program to strengthen the sonar's signal. He wrote a filter, an entirely new kind of algorithm designed to identify the defensive pulse, understand its structure, and slip the sonar's acoustic probe through the gaps in its logic. He was teaching the sonar how to be invisible, how to listen through the roar of a dragon to hear the secrets of its cave. It was a complete paradigm shift, a leap of faith grounded in the hard math of failure. After 36 hours, exhausted and trembling, he was done. He emerged from his cabin looking like a ghost. His eyes were bloodshot, his face pale, but he moved with a chilling, newfound purpose. He walked into the control room and found Harris overseeing the ship's mundane daily diagnostics. "I have a new filter for the sonar," Kaelen announced, his voice a dry rasp. "I want to deploy it." Harris turned, an expression of open contempt on his face. "Are you serious? You want to risk another multi-million-dollar piece of equipment based on what? A hunch? Eva would have my head." "We're not deploying a drone," Kaelen said, handing him a data slate. "Just the towed sonar array, the fish. It's low power, less intrusive. My algorithm isn't about power, it's about perception." Harris scoffed as he looked at the code. "This is junk science, Vance. You're trying to psychoanalyze an energy field." But he couldn't deny the elegance of the mathematics. It was unorthodox, but it was internally consistent. With a heavy, theatrical sigh of reluctance, he gave the order. The cylindrical sonar fish was lowered into the ocean. In the control room, the crew watched the main screen, their faces a mixture of boredom and morbid curiosity. Harris stood with his arms crossed, a smirk on his face, ready to watch Kaelen fail a second time. At first, it seemed he would get his wish. The screen was a blizzard of static, the speakers hissing with chaotic noise as the fish descended into the energy field. "Just like I said," Harris muttered. "Nothing but noise." Kaelen ignored him, his eyes fixed on a small diagnostic window in the corner of the screen where his algorithm was working, analyzing the chaos. The status read, analyzing, then pattern detected, and finally, locking. Now, Kaelen whispered. On the main screen, something shifted. A single line of static at the very top of the display suddenly snapped into a sharp, clear contour. Then another below it, and another. As if a photographic print were developing in a darkroom, Kaelen's filter was catching the sonar pings that slipped through the energy field's defenses, assembling them into a coherent image, line by painstaking line. The hissing from the speakers faded, replaced by the steady, clean ping, ping, ping of a successful sonar lock. The control room fell into a stunned, absolute silence. The only sound was the rhythmic pinging and the soft hum of the ship's electronics. Everyone stared, mesmerized, as an impossible picture resolved itself from the depths. The final image locked into place, filling the screen with a sight that had no business existing in the natural world. It was not a seamount. It was not a canyon. It was not a geological feature of any kind. It was a structure, vast, sprawling, and utterly alien. It covered the seafloor for what must have been miles. It was a city of perfect sweeping lines and impossible, non-Euclidean curves. Towers that should have buckled under their own weight soared into the eternal darkness. Plazas wider than cities lay in silent grandeur, and at its very center, a soft golden light pulsed with the same slow rhythmic beat as the signal Kaelen had first detected. It was a dim, sleeping star at the bottom of the world. Harris, the man of unwavering skepticism, stared at the screen, his mouth slightly agape. He let out a choked, disbelieving whisper. That's not possible." Kaelen didn't say a word. His face was a mask of pure, awed disbelief. His scientific quest for a rational explanation had led him to something that defied all rationality. This was the moment, the photograph that could never be taken, the discovery that could never be shared. He had found the ghost in the machine. Deeply shaken, Kaelen retreated to the solitude of his cabin. The impossible image of the sunken city was burned into his mind. The neatly ordered world of his science, with its rules and its predictable forces, had been shattered. He felt adrift, untethered from everything he thought he knew. In a daze, he knelt and pulled a dusty footlocker from beneath his bunk. It contained the few effects that had been recovered from Lyra's drifting, empty life raft. Clothes, a sextant, and her journal. He had always avoided reading it too closely. He'd flipped through it once, seen pages filled with sketches of waves and what he'd dismissed as poetic, unscientific nonsense. Now he opened it with trembling hands, seeing it with new eyes. He read of myths she had collected from old sailors in port towns, tales of a sunken star, and a place where the ocean's floor was a doorway to the heavens. He read her own thoughts, her feelings about the currents and the tides, which she described not as physical forces, but as the breathing of a sleeping giant. It was the worldview he had so arrogantly dismissed. He turned to the final pages, written in the days before she disappeared. They were filled with frantic sketches of a complex spiral pattern. A pattern, she said, came to her in a dream. A pattern that was an exact perfect match for the design of the central, light-emitting structure now glowing on his sonar screen. His breath caught in his throat. Tucked into a flap on the back cover was a small folded note. He had never seen it before. His fingers shook as he unfolded the brittle paper. It was Lyra's handwriting. "It's not an accident if you're navigating to it. See you on the other side, Kay." Kaelen stared at the note, and the entire foundation of his 5-year quest crumbled into dust. This hadn't been a scientific investigation. It had been an act of following. Lyra hadn't been a victim of the mystery. She had been a pilgrim to its heart. Her disappearance wasn't an accident. It was a destination. And her unscientific, superstitious, dream-filled journal was not a collection of nonsense. It was a map. The image of the sunken city remained on the main screen in the control room. a silent, damning testament to the impossible. The crew spoke in hushed tones, stealing glances at it as if it were a sleeping beast. The official ship's log, under Harris's terse entry, described it as a highly unusual geological formation with anomalous energy readings. It was a lie of scientific self-preservation, and everyone knew it. Kaelen called a meeting. He gathered the small crew in the ship's mess hall. On a large monitor at the end of the table, Eva Rostova's face watched them via video link, her expression a mask of controlled fury and disbelief. Kaelen, holding Lyra's weathered journal, was a changed man. The haunted, obsessive researcher was gone, replaced by someone with a terrifying, absolute certainty. "We're going down," he announced, his voice calm and steady. "Harris and I will take the Triton submersible to the structure." The room erupted. Harris shot to his feet, his face pale with anger. "Absolutely not. The Argo was the most advanced drone on the planet, and that thing swatted it like a fly. Sending a manned sub down there isn't a mission, it's a suicide run." On the monitor, Eva's voice was like ice. "I forbid it, Kaelen. Forbid it. Your mandate was a preliminary survey, which you have completed. The next step is to analyze the data and petition for a full, unmanned follow-up expedition. That is the protocol." Kaelen looked from Harris's panicked face to Eva's authoritarian glare. He felt no fear, no hesitation. He felt only the pull of a destiny he was just beginning to understand. "Protocol?" he said, a humorless smile touching his lips. "Protocol is for when the world makes sense, Eva. It's for when your discoveries fit within the known bounds of physics. What we have down there rewrites the book." He held up Lyra's journal. "This isn't about magnetic fields anymore. This is a first contact scenario." He opened the journal to the page with the sketch of the spiral that matched the heart of the Sunken City. He showed it to them, the camera on his laptop transmitting the image to Eva. "My sister drew this 8 years ago," he said, his voice dropping, becoming more personal, more intense. "She knew it was here. She wrote about this place. She called it a doorway." He looked directly at Harris, then at the faces of the crew. "She wasn't running from a storm. She was navigating to a destination. I'm not going down there to collect data on rocks. I'm going down there to find out what's on the other side of that door. I'm going." It was no longer a request. It was a statement of fact. His argument had nothing to do with science. It was an act of pure, unadulterated faith, driven by the evidence of a dead woman's dream. Eva was speechless, her institutional authority rendered meaningless. Harris stared at the journal, then at Kaelen's unshakable resolve, and a look of dawning horror crossed his face. He knew he had lost the argument. He knew he was going down into the abyss. The Triton submersible was a cramped titanium sphere, a bubble of science and sanity against the crushing blackness of the deep ocean. Harris piloted with a white-knuckled tension, his hands gripping the controls as the sub was released from the Logos and began its long, slow descent. Kaelen was not looking at the instrument panels. His face was pressed against the thick, curved viewport, his eyes staring into the darkness, searching. For the first 2,000 meters, the descent was quiet, routine. Then, they entered the outer edges of the energy field. The lights inside the cabin flickered once, twice, then began to pulse with a soft, golden glow, matching the rhythm of the signal Kaelen knew by heart. A low, resonant hum vibrated through the hull, a sound so deep it felt less like hearing and more like a pressure change in the bones. "EM interference," Harris said, his voice tight, trying to wrap the strangeness in the comforting blanket of technical jargon. "The field is playing with our electrical systems." Alarms began to scream, a cacophony of pointless warnings. A proximity alert shrieked, then died. A hull pressure warning blared, then went silent. The systems were failing, not with the clean finality of the drone's demise, but with a chaotic, playful malevolence. The rational, contained world of the submersible was being invaded, its rules rewritten by the irrational force outside. Kaelen remained transfixed by the view. The golden light from the structure below was becoming visible now, a faint aurora in the crushing dark. It was beautiful, terrifying, and felt more real than the failing instruments around him. He was not descending into a dead zone. He was entering a living presence. The hum intensified, no longer just a vibration, but a chorus of harmonious, overlapping tones. It was the sound of the world's oldest secret, and it was welcoming him home. Then he saw her. She was outside the viewport, shimmering in the golden light of the abyss. It was Lyra, not a ghost, not a memory, but her. She wore the same clothes she had on the docks the day she left. The silver spiral charm at her throat pulsed with a soft light. She wasn't lost or in pain. She smiled at him that same sad, knowing smile, and she was unafraid. She raised her hand and pointed, not at him, but forward, deeper, toward the heart of the glowing structure below. A single tear traced a path down Kaelen's cheek. The years of guilt, of cold, empty science, of gnawing uncertainty, dissolved in an instant of pure, impossible recognition. "You found it," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. His hand came up to touch the cold glass of the viewport. Harris, who had been fighting with the controls, flinched at the sound of Kaelen's voice. He looked at Kaelen, then at the empty darkness outside the viewport. His face, already pale, turned white with terror. "Who are you talking to?" he yelled, his voice frantic. "Kaelen, who are you talking to? There's nothing out there." Kaelen didn't answer. He didn't seem to hear him. He was lost in the vision, his entire being focused on his sister's smiling face. He saw the path forward. He understood her final note. "See you on the other side." "There's nothing out there," Harris screamed again, his voice cracking with panic. He was a man of science, of instruments and procedures, and his co-pilot was now communing with the impossible. But Kaelen just smiled, a mirror of the apparition only he could see. His scientific mind, the one that had been forged in logic and broken by hubris, was not fracturing. It was expanding, surrendering, and finally, for the first time in 7 years, it was healing. He was no longer observing the phenomenon. He was a part of it. The Triton continued its slow, inexorable descent, a dead thing drawn by an invisible tide. Harris's panicked shouts had subsided into ragged, fearful breaths. He had seen everything he trusted his instruments, his training, his very perception of reality fail him. Now, he was just a passenger. Kaelen, however, was no longer looking out the viewport. His eyes were closed, but he saw everything more clearly than ever. He was seeing the path Lyra had taken, feeling the rightness of it in his bones. They arrived. The submersible drifted to a halt before the central structure, a silent, breathtaking city of impossible architecture that glowed with a soft, internal light. It was a place that had waited in the dark for eons, dreaming of starlight. As they floated before it, the last vestiges of their technology gave up the ghost. The pulsing golden emergency lights in the cabin faded to black. The low hum of the energy field ceased, replaced by a profound and absolute silence. They were utterly powerless, a tiny, fragile shell in the face of something ancient and vast. Then, the city opened its eye. In the center of the main structure, a section of the impossible geometry began to move. A vast portal, like the iris of a colossal eye, dilated smoothly, revealing not darkness, but a swirling vortex of brilliant white light. A gentle but irresistible current began to flow from the submersible toward the opening. "No, no, no," Harris whimpered, clawing at the dead controls. "Kaelen, do something!" But Kaelen was eerily calm. He watched the light grow, a sense of homecoming washing over him. This wasn't an attack. It wasn't destruction. It was an invitation. As the Triton was drawn inexorably into the light, Harris finally succumbed to the terror and slumped into unconsciousness. Kaelen faced the portal alone, his heart filled not with fear, but with peace. Inside was not a building. Inside was not a place. Inside was the cascade. It was a space of pure, unfiltered being, where time and space were meaningless concepts. The Triton and its metallic shell had vanished, or perhaps never mattered. Kaelen floated, untethered, in a sea of light and energy. Harris was nearby, unconscious and peaceful, adrift in the same current. Kaelen unbuckled his seatbelt, a meaningless gesture, and drifted out into the heart of the phenomenon. The light didn't blind him, it informed him. It felt like memory, like information flowing through him, not into his mind, but into his very soul. He felt the slow, patient crushing of geological strata, the weight of 1,000,000 years of ocean pressing down. He saw the flash of cosmic rays, the birth of constellations in a nebula 1,000,000,000 light years away. He heard the faint, ghostly echo of ancient sailors' prayers, men who had passed over this spot in wooden ships, feeling a strange awe, a shiver of the sublime without ever knowing why. He was not an observer of the universe, he was a participant in its endless, unfolding consciousness. It was a state of pure being that transcended science, that made science seem like a child's attempt to draw the sun with a crayon. And in the heart of that light, in the center of that timeless, spaceless space, he felt her. Lyra. There was no image of her smiling face, no sound of her gentle voice. There was only a presence, a pure, emotional, telepathic knowing that was more real than any sight or sound. It was the essence of her love, her courage, her unshakable faith in the unseen. He understood. This place, the cascade, was a nexus, a pathway between worlds, a place where consciousness could step from one reality to another. She wasn't lost. She hadn't died. She had chosen to pass through the doorway, and she was okay. More than okay. She was vast. She was home. The crushing weight of 7 years of guilt for his arrogance, for his dismissal of her beliefs, for not being there, simply dissolved. His grief, a cold, hard stone he had carried in his chest for so long, turned to dust and was washed away by the current of light. He had his answer. It was unfalsifiable. It was unprovable. It would mean nothing to Eva or Harris or the world of science he had left behind, but it was utterly, completely real. A profound, tearful peace settled over him. His journey was over. He was back in his seat. The Triton was dark and silent. Harris was stirring in the pilot's seat beside him, groaning softly. Then, with a soft chime, the lights flickered back on. The instrument panels lit up, running through frantic self-diagnostics. Power had returned. Outside the viewport, the great portal was closing, the iris contracting until it was once again a seamless part of the impossible city. The structure as soft, internal light was dimming, as if it were settling back into a long and peaceful slumber. With its systems online, the submersible buoyancy controls automatically engaged, and they began their slow, silent ascent to the surface. Hours later, Kaelen stood in the control room of the Logos. The crew was gathered around the main console, staring in stunned silence at the data logs recovered from the Triton. Terabytes of impossible readings, gravitational and temporal distortions that violated the laws of physics, energy signatures that had no scientific explanation. It was proof, hard scientific proof of something. They had a map of a miracle, a blueprint of God, and no way to read it. But Kaelen wasn't looking at the screens. His obsession with data, with charts and numbers, was gone. He stood by a viewport, looking out at the calm blue surface of the ocean. In his hand, he held Lyra's small, silver spiral charm, which he had recovered from her journal. It felt warm in his palm. He had the scientific data, the map that would confound researchers for a century. But he also had the experience, the territory, the unfalsifiable truth that had healed his soul. He finally understood what Lyra had meant. Not everything that's real can be measured. And for the first time in a very long time, Dr. Kaelen Vance was finally at peace. What's so compelling about Kaelen Vance's story isn't just that he finds an answer to the Bermuda Triangle mystery, but how he finds it. He begins as a man who trusts nothing but measurable, verifiable data. His entire quest is an attempt to impose the rigid order of science onto the chaos of superstition. And in a way, science succeeds brilliantly. His methods get him the funding, his algorithm deciphers the signal, and his sonar puts the image of an impossible structure on his screen. But that's precisely where science reaches its limit. The data can show him that something is there, but it can't tell him what it is, or more importantly, what it means. For that, he needs his sister Lyra's journal, a collection of dreams, myths, and intuition. The very things he, as a scientist, had once dismissed as sentimental nonsense. The story suggests that the ultimate truth isn't a choice between science and faith, but a synthesis of both. Kaelen ends the story with two forms of proof: terabytes of impossible data that will confound scientists for a century, and a personal, unprovable experience that finally heals his grief. The map of science led him to a territory that could only be navigated by faith. It leaves us with a fascinating question about our own relationship with the unknown. When does a personal experience become so profound that it qualifies as its own form of truth, even if it defies all rational explanation?